My daughter-in-law said I was going to ruin the party, but no one can imagine what I carried for decades to keep that family going. I remained silent for many years, too many years, but ah, that night, I went up on stage and told them the truth they never had the courage to hear. And when I placed the envelope on my own son's chest, he couldn't say a single word. I still remember the exact moment those words pierced my chest like a cold knife. It was late afternoon, and I was sitting in my simple kitchen, with the smell of stale coffee clinging to the air and the golden sunlight hitting the faded tablecloth. The phone vibrated, and when I saw my daughter-in-law's name on the screen, my heart skipped a beat, a mix of hope and apprehension. I answered softly, the way an elderly woman does when trying to maintain her dignity, but the first sentence I heard was so harsh that it still echoes within me today. You're going to ruin the party. Just like that. No beating around the bush. No good afternoon. No respect, no affection. Just that. In that moment, I felt my whole body shrink, as if the kitchen walls had closed in on me. I took a deep breath, trying to understand what it meant, but before I could say anything, I heard my son's breathing in the background. He was there. He was listening. He was letting it happen. That hurt more than the words themselves. My daughter-in-law continued speaking in that falsely sweet tone, that honeyed sound that only serves to hide poison. She said the party would be sophisticated, that there would be important people, that she didn't want unpleasant situations. I listened to everything in silence, clutching the dish towel between my fingers, because it was the only thing keeping me grounded. Each of her words seemed to carry an accusation that I never understood where it came from. I was the mother. My God, since when did I become a threat? When I heard my son in the background saying, "That's it, Mom, better not to overdo it," I felt my chest burn. His voice was different. Cold. Distant. It wasn't the boy I held in my arms during feverish nights, the one I supported by selling bread and sewing clothes for the neighbor. It was another man, one I barely recognized anymore. And the worst part wasn't the phrase itself, but his silent cowardice in letting another woman put me in this position. The position of someone who needs to be controlled. I tried to calmly ask what exactly I could do that might ruin something. My voice even faltered, because it's not easy to ask that without feeling diminished. My daughter-in-law laughed, that short little laugh she gives when she wants to show superiority, and said, "You know how you are emotional, intense, you talk too much." And I was speechless. Because I always thought being emotional was a quality, not a flaw. It was that too much of hers that kept hammering in my head. Too much for whom? Excessive for what? As she poured out those delicate criticisms, as delicate as ground glass, my mind drifted back in time. I remembered his first birthday, the simple party with carrot cake covered in hot chocolate. Him hugging me with his hands covered in frosting, saying, "Mom, you're the best cook in the world." It's funny how the heart searches for old memories to try and recover something that's slipping through its fingers. But at that moment, I realized that those memories were staying only with me and no longer with him. The call ended with my daughter-in-law saying she hoped I would cooperate. Cooperate, that word stung me like a needle. I stood there with my phone in my hand, listening to the clock on the wall ticking away at an incredibly slow pace. The house seemed bigger, emptier, quieter. And I felt so small, it seemed like my body would disappear inside the chair. I think that was the worst moment, realizing I could disappear and they wouldn't even notice. After I hung up, I stared at my reflection in the window pane. The disheveled white hair, the wrinkled skin, the tired gaze. It seemed that for the first time I saw myself as they saw me, someone who bothers them. But then something inside me reacted, something warm, ancient, a strength I thought I had lost. I thought, spoil the party? Me? After everything I've done? After everything I've given? My heart beat differently at that moment. I spent the rest of the night in silence, sitting on the edge of the bed, remembering every detail of our story, every sacrifice I made, every unspoken injustice, every abandonment disguised as modernity. And the more I remembered, the more I understood that my daughter-in-law's words weren't just an attack, they were a reflection of something much bigger that had been happening for years. something that needed to be faced head-on for the first time. It was there, in that cold dawn, with the moon illuminating my room and my tears slowly streaming down my face, that I made a silent decision. I didn't yet know how or when or where. But one thing I knew, that party wouldn't be what they expected. Not in the cruel way she hinted. Because I, who had always swallowed everything to keep the peace, was about to do something no one imagined. Something that would leave even my son speechless. And little did my daughter-in-law know that the last person she should have provoked was me. It's strange to think that the house that once echoed with laughter, hurried footsteps, and the smells of hot food now seems more like a faded memory than a home. But that's exactly how the distance from my son began after he got married. I noticed it little by little, at first disguised, almost imperceptible, as if affection was seeping through the cracks in the door without me being able to hold it back. One less invitation, a shorter visit, a conversation that ended too quickly, small signs, but for a mother, they scream louder than any words. I remember when he brought his wife here for the first time. The house was decorated just the way I liked it, with the makeshift plant pots, the old embroidery, the photos of him as a child in frames crooked with age. I was so happy that my hands trembled as I made coffee. But I immediately noticed her gaze examining everything, like someone analyzing flaws in a shop window. It was a fleeting moment, but enough to make my stomach churn. And my son, he just pretended not to see. After that visit, he started making excuses. First, it was because they were busy. Then, because the house was far away. Later, because his wife didn't feel comfortable in my house. That phrase, my God, that phrase is etched in my memory. Since when does a mother's house need to be comfortable for an outsider? I kept thinking about it for days, until I realized that, for them, maybe I was the discomfort. And that hurt me in a way that no physical pain can come close to. The calls started to become less frequent too. Before, he would call me from work almost every day, just to see if I was okay, if I needed anything, or simply to hear my voice. After the wedding, each call felt like a rush, as if he were counting down the seconds until he could hang up. And when I asked if everything was all right, he would always say, "I'm here, Mom." That's all. Short, apathetic, distant. As if his life had been relocated to another planet, and I was no longer allowed to visit him. There was a day when I realized something had truly changed. I had prepared a large pot of stew, the one he'd loved since he was little, with the smell of frying garlic and the whole house fragrant. I called to invite him. On the other end, I heard him quietly ask his wife if it was worth going. My heart almost dropped. She replied something like, "Oh, let's go another day. Your mother makes heavy food." Heavy food. My food. The same food that sustained him his whole life. I hung up saying it was fine, but I spent the whole afternoon trying to understand where I'd lost my place. Over time, I began to notice that, on the few occasions they came here, my son would become tense. He would look at his wife constantly, as if seeking approval before each sentence. He was never like that. As a child, he was decisive, bold, full of opinions. Now he seemed like a boy afraid of making mistakes. And I, from my corner, could only observe this painful transformation. A mother sees these things. A mother feels these things. Our hearts pick up even what no one says. One of the situations that marked me the most was when he came to pick up some documents he had left here. He came in hurriedly, didn't want coffee, didn't want to sit down. He kept looking at his watch, as if he were late for life. I tried to talk to him, to tell him some news, but he just kept saying, "Yes, Mom, I'll talk later." And when he left through the door, I had an overwhelming feeling that I was saying goodbye to him, as if that son I knew was leaving and would never come back the same way. The house began to change for me. The furniture seemed older, the walls emptier, even the sound of the wind passing through the windows seemed sadder. I walked through the rooms as if visiting ruins of a time that was once happy. The kitchen, once noisy with pots and pans and laughter, was now silent. The hallway, which had seen so many races in little slippers, now only saw my slow steps. Everything lost its color, as if the world had drained the saturation from my life. There was a moment when I realized that my home was only still standing out of stubbornness. Because, deep down, I already carried the feeling of being an unwelcome visitor in my own son's life. And that feeling hurts in a way that doesn't heal quickly. I tried not to show it. I tried to hide the tears when he hung up. I tried to convince myself that it was all in my head. But a mother feels when she's being left out. There's no lie that can fool a mother's heart. And it was precisely during this period that a silent fear was born. The fear of losing my son not to the world, not to work, not to life, but to the influence of someone who never saw me as family. This fear remained hidden within me like a growing shadow, preparing the ground for what was yet to come. Because, little did I know, that phrase about spoiling the party would only be the drop that would reveal the entire storm hidden behind their smiles. I always believed that life's greatest pains don't arrive all at once. They come in small, disguised installments, like someone throwing crumbs to see how much you can bear. My daughter-in-law's first humiliations came like that, almost imperceptibly, hidden behind overly polite smiles and comments that seemed innocent to the ears of those unfamiliar with malice. But a mother notices everything. And I noticed every sideways glance, every stifled giggle, every silence that spoke louder than any words. I remember the first time I clearly felt she had something against me. It was at a Sunday lunch, when I was still trying to please her in every way. I made my son's favorite dish, roast chicken with potatoes and rosemary, the kind that perfumes the whole house and announces that there's love on the table. She sat down, looked at the plate, and let out a muffled giggle, commenting, "Wow, it's quite rustic, isn't it?" I pretended not to hear, but inside I felt as if someone had turned off the living room light. Again, while we were talking, I told a silly story from my son's childhood, one of those memories that makes any mother smile. She raised an eyebrow, with that air of superiority, and said, "Oh, those old stories. Nobody needs to know those things." Nobody. Am I nobody? I asked myself that for days. Because it felt exactly like that I shouldn't exist when she was around. As if I were an object out of place in the perfect decoration she wanted to create. One day, she came here with my son and walked around the house like she was inspecting flaws. She ran her hand over the furniture, looked at old photos with boredom, and when she saw my little embroidery on the chair, she asked, "Did you make this yourself? How cute, very grandma-like." And whose grandma am I? She didn't even have children yet. But the tone she used, it seemed to say, "You belong to the past. I am the present." That affected me more than it should have. And it hurt because my son, instead of defending me, gave a sheepish little laugh, as if agreeing. There was something in her gaze that pierced me. It wasn't hatred, direct hatred, of course. Hers was worse. It was elegant contempt. A contempt that only someone who considers themselves superior can demonstrate without raising their voice. And every time she treated me like that, a part of my son seemed to die with her. He, who used to hug me tightly, now greeted me with a pat on the shoulder. He, who used to bring me simple flowers, now arrived empty-handed, as if my house were an obligation that needed to be fulfilled quickly. The small humiliations were piling up like dust in a corner. At a family gathering, she said that my son only learned good manners after he met her. Everyone laughed. I laughed too, but inside, a hot tear burned behind my eyes. Good manners? Who taught him to apologize, to share toys, to respect others? Who raised that boy with so much love? But she spoke as if she had molded everything from scratch. There was also the towel incident. I don't know if you believe in these things, but for me, objects carry stories. I gave her a towel I had embroidered myself, one of those I make at night to ward off loneliness. She thanked me coldly, and days later, I discovered she had left the towel in the trunk of the car, all crumpled. My son, trying to justify himself, said, "Oh, honey, don't worry, it's just a towel." Just. A heavy word when it comes to something made with affection. One of the most striking little humiliations was when she insinuated that my house smelled old. She deliberately opened the windows, exaggerating her comments. "Let's air it out, shall we? It smells like nostalgia." Nostalgia. The elegant way of saying that my house, and my things were outdated. And my son? He remained quiet, only helping to open the windows, as if agreeing. I felt such a strong tightness in my chest that I needed to sit down. What hurt me most wasn't her sharp tongue. It was my son's silence. Because silence, sometimes, hurts more than a scream. He seemed afraid to contradict her. And I, who have known him since his first breath, could clearly see that it wasn't natural. It was a heavy, rehearsed, imposed silence. And that silence told me a truth I didn't want to accept. He was choosing her side, even when she was stepping all over me. And it was in those small humiliations, in those details that no one from the outside notices, that my soul began to prepare itself for what would come next. Because everything in life gives signs. Nothing happens suddenly. The day she said I was going to ruin the party wasn't an isolated attack. It was just the loudest chapter in a story that had been written in silence. And I was already tired of being a supporting character in the life I helped to build. I never imagined that one day I would receive this from my own son, or rather, my daughter-in-law using his cell phone, a list of rules about how I should behave. It was early evening when my phone vibrated and I saw the long message, full of bullet points, as if I were a rebellious teenager about to cause a scandal. For a moment, I thought it was a mistake. But when I read the first sentence, I realized it had been written especially for me. Please follow this so you don't embarrass yourself at the party. The "don't embarrass yourself" clearly meant not to be ashamed. The list began with the most absurd. Clothing. Please choose something discreet, without glitter, bright colors, or antique lace. I almost dropped my phone. My daughter-in-law has always hated my clothes, but seeing it written down as a rule gave me the feeling that a piece of my identity had been ripped away. My clothes are simple, but they're mine. They're part of my history. But there, in that cold text, it was as if I had been forced to erase who I am to fit into her mold. The second item was even more offensive. Behavior. Avoid telling old stories, especially those involving embarrassing moments from his childhood. Embarrassing? Since when did memories of love and sacrifice become embarrassing? I stared at the words, feeling my chest tighten. The stories she forbade were precisely the ones that shaped the man he is. But in her eyes, my past, his past, was something to be swept under the rug. The third item stated, "Don't cry. Emotional events are delicate, and crying can draw unnecessary attention." I took a deep breath. Close your eyes and imagine a mother being instructed not to feel. I, who always cried at my son's small victories, who was moved to see him grow, was being forbidden from showing emotion. That hurt in a silent way, as if someone had erased my memories with an eraser. Then came, "Don't bring extravagant gifts." Extravagant? I laughed to myself. What extravagance could come from a lady who lives with little? But I understood the message. She was afraid I would show up with something that clashed with the perfect party she had organized. The truth is, deep down, she wanted me to be invisible. A silent, neutral presence. One that wouldn't interfere, that wouldn't shine. That was it. I was supposed to be a ghost. The fifth item was almost cruel. Avoid bringing up the subject of family, especially stories of past financial difficulties. At that moment, I felt my eyes burning. Because our history, our struggle, our sacrifices, all of that was forbidden. As if I were burdened with shame. As if my battles had tarnished their name. That item was what broke me the most inside. It was as if they were telling me, erase your life, so as not to interfere with ours. That's when I realized that the text was full of words that they did not belong to my son. He would never speak like that. He would never write social event, sophisticated environment, appropriate behavior. That was her voice, her hand, her humiliation, and his silence. That silence that screams. That silence that carries cowardice, fear, submission. I read and reread the message, trying to find a trace of the boy I raised, but there wasn't one. At the end of the text, there was a short sentence. "We count on your cooperation to avoid spoiling the atmosphere." That sentence hit me like a slap in the face. Ruin the mood? Me, the mother? Me, who gave everything. Me, Who protected that boy from things he can't even imagine? I got up from the chair, walked around the kitchen, trying to ease the pressure in my chest. But the more I walked, the more I understood. That woman was trying to erase me. Every rule was an attempt to make me smaller. I spent the whole night thinking about the message. I lay down and got up several times, like someone searching for an answer in the dark. And the more I thought, the more I realized it wasn't just about the party. It was about putting myself in the lowest possible place. It was about reducing myself to a shadow. It was about controlling every aspect of myself. And for the first time in a long time, something inside me refused to accept it. I didn't yet know what I would do. But inside my chest, an old flame began to ignite again. A flame she never imagined I still had. There are things a mother keeps so deep in her heart that neither time, nor age, nor loneliness can tear them away. I've always believed that certain secrets are like internal scars. They can't be seen, but they burn every time we touch the memory. And that week, reading my daughter-in-law's messages, listening to my son's coldness, I felt the scar throb as if begging to be remembered. It was as if the past was knocking at the door saying, "Now you're going to need me." And I knew that, sooner or later, this story would come to light. It all started many years ago, at a time when my son was still too young to understand the consequences of his own actions. He had a difficult temperament back then, full of impulses, bad friends, and a certain need to prove something to the world. I saw it all unfold before my eyes. I felt the danger lurking at the door, but no mother can be everywhere at once. And one night, a single night, was enough to change the entire course of our lives. That day, I received a call that still echoes in my head. A serious, firm voice saying that my son had gotten himself into serious trouble, serious enough to destroy his reputation, his future career, and most likely his freedom. My world collapsed in a fraction of a second. I felt my legs weaken, as if the ground had disappeared beneath me. I breathed deeply, trying to stay conscious, because a mother doesn't have the right to faint when her son needs her. When I arrived at the designated place, I found my son pale, nervous, his eyes filled with despair. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me like a frightened child expecting his mother to solve everything. And I solved it. I didn't ask anything. I didn't shout. I didn't question. I just hugged him and said, "Everything will be all right," even when I myself didn't believe it. Because that night, behind the sirens and accusing glances, I understood that I would do anything to save my boy. And I did. I did things no one can imagine. I took the blame for things that weren't mine. I signed papers I should never have signed. I sold what little I had, including an inheritance from my mother, to pay lawyers he doesn't even know existed. I lied to authorities, covered up details, begged influential people. I humiliated myself. I knelt. I did it all in silence. Because back then I believed that a mother's love meant carrying crosses that her children couldn't bear. When everything was resolved, or at least kept hidden, my son returned to his normal life as if nothing had happened. Did he thank me? Yes, but in a superficial, quick, almost automatic way. As if he didn't grasp the cost of sacrificing one's own life. He didn't know that I spent sleepless nights, trembling with fear that someone would discover the truth. He didn't know that I cried alone in the kitchen, clutching the crucifix my mother gave me, begging God that it would never come to light. After he got married, the secret was buried even deeper. His wife never knew. And I noticed that my son avoided the subject like someone avoiding ghosts. Sometimes, when the conversation got too close, his eyes would look away, as if he were ashamed to look at me. I think, deep down, he couldn't bear to remember that I saved his life in a way no one can imagine. Maybe out of guilt, maybe out of fear, maybe because, in his mind, it all contradicted the perfect image his wife had built around him. Over the years, I learned to live with the silence of this secret. I learned to keep it like a heavy stone deep in my soul. I never told anyone, not even friends, not even family. It was my burden, my love, my silent mark on my son's destiny. But that week, reading the list of rules, hearing my daughter-in-law say that I could ruin the party, I felt something change. How could someone I saved from the abyss now be ashamed of me? And that's when I understood. That secret, the same one I'd hidden for so many years, could be the key to everything. The key to freeing my son from her influence. The key to showing the world who truly carried this family on her shoulders. The key to finally putting everything in its place. I still didn't know how. I still didn't know when. But I felt, deep down, that the moment to reveal the truth was approaching, as silent as the night it all began. And as I stared at the ceiling in the early hours of the morning, with the whole house plunged into darkness, I felt a profound certainty. My daughter-in-law had touched the only wound she should never have touched. And, without knowing it, she had awakened the part of me that I thought had died long ago. On the eve of the party, I stood before the wardrobe for long minutes, as if I were about to make a life-changing decision. It's funny how a piece of clothing can carry so much meaning, but at that moment it was as if each fabric told a part of my story. I touched the dresses with my fingertips, feeling the roughness of the old cotton, the softness of lace aged by time, and the faint scent of soap that I always leave in the drawers. Nothing there was new. Nothing there was appropriate for my daughter-in-law's standards. But that was all I had. I chose a simple navy blue dress with small hand-embroidered details I'd done years ago during a sleepless night. It was a dress that carried memories. I wore it to my son's 18th birthday party, when he still smiled with his eyes and hugged me without fear of seeming sentimental. I ran my hand over the embroidery and almost felt the warmth of that old hug. But along with it came the bitter thought, will she laugh at this? That question echoed inside me as I got dressed. When I stood in front of the mirror, I felt something was missing, perhaps confidence, perhaps courage. I looked at my reflection more honestly than I would have liked. Gray, disheveled hair, a face marked by time, tired eyes, but there was something there that no one could take from me. Dignity. So, I picked up my old necklace, the one with the slightly scratched stone that my mother gave me before she passed away. I put it around my neck, took a deep breath, and said to myself, go as you are. You weren't born to please anyone. Despite all that, deep down, I knew that dress would be the subject of comments. My daughter-in-law always had a subtle way of belittling my style. The last time she saw me dressed up, she looked me up and down and said, wow, it's traditional. Traditional. A word that, in her mouth, sounded outdated, old-fashioned, out of style. But words only gain power when we believe in them. And that day, I promised not to give her that satisfaction, even though my heart was trembling like a leaf in the wind. On the day of the party, before leaving home, I put on a perfume I saved for special occasions, that light jasmine scent that always made me feel more alive. As I walked to the door, I felt my hands sweating. It felt like I was going to a performance, not a family event. The idea that my appearance would be analyzed, judged, and possibly ridiculed by that woman made me uneasy. But I kept going, because, as much as it hurt, I still wanted to be present in my son's life. The experience began even before I entered the hall. I saw my daughter-in-law in the distance, surrounded by guests, laughing loudly, beautiful in her expensive, impeccable dress, as if she were the hostess of a grand ball. When she saw me, her eyes slowly traveled down my dress, and her smile tightened into an expression I know well, one that mixes mockery and judgment. She approached, holding a glass of sparkling wine, and said, wow, how cute. So simple. It suits you. I felt my face heat up, but I kept a firm smile. What she said seemed small to anyone else, but to me it was like being slapped in front of everyone. My son was nearby, and for a second I thought he was going to say something. Silly hope. He just looked away, pretending not to hear. The pain didn't come from her words. It came from his silence. Because humiliation from outsiders is something we can overlook, but humiliation from our own blood, we carry as a mark. After that, I heard whispers. I don't know if they were talking about me or someone else, but when a woman looked at my dress and whispered in her friend's ear, I felt that old insecurity return. It's amazing how our minds create monsters when we're already vulnerable. I tried to convince myself they were just ideas, but deep down I knew. My daughter-in-law had planted seeds of contempt at that party, and they were blooming rapidly. I walked to a more secluded corner of the hall, where the music seemed less loud and the air easier to breathe. I ran my hand over the embroidery on my dress, the one I had made with so much care, and wondered why something so simple had to be a source of shame for someone. I remembered all the clothes I had bought secondhand, all the times I had altered old dresses to avoid overspending. I always prioritized my son. Always. And now, my way of life seemed to be a problem for him. But there, leaning against the cold wall of that expensive hall, with a heavy heart and a head full of memories, something unexpected began to grow inside me. A different feeling. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't anger. It was strength. A strength that came from the depths of my soul. As if the simple dress, so despised by her, was reminding me of who I truly am. And I knew that that party still held something much greater for me. Something that would change everything. Something she could never imagine. When I stepped inside the hall, I immediately felt that cold feeling in my stomach that only appears when we know we're not welcome. The door hadn't even closed behind me yet, and I could already see eyes turning in my direction. They weren't curious looks, much less welcoming ones. They were evaluating looks, as if I were an out-of-place piece in that scene full of glitter, loud music, and gleaming glasses. With each step, I felt my legs getting heavier, almost as if my body was fighting the urge to go home. The room was lit with warm, golden lights, reflecting off the walls as if it were a dream too expensive for a simple woman like me. The tables were set with napkins folded into flower shapes, plates that looked like fine porcelain, and flower arrangements that probably cost more than my entire pantry. I walked slowly, trying not to show my insecurity, even though I felt each gaze as if it were a sharp blade cutting my skin. The feeling of inferiority came so quickly that I even felt my throat close up. From afar, I saw my son talking to some people. He was smiling, elegant, dressed better than ever. For a brief second, my heart filled with pride. But that feeling was short-lived. When he saw me, his smile faltered, just for an instant, but enough for me to notice. He straightened his posture, adjusted his shirt, and looked away, as if my presence had disrupted the balance of the surrounding environment. That gesture hurt far more than any harsh word he had ever said to me. My daughter-in-law, on the other hand, came toward me with that practiced smile, sweet on the outside and sharp on the inside. The sound of her heels echoed in the hall as if announcing something important or dangerous. When she got close, she gently took my arm and said, "It's so good that you managed to come," with a pause so long it almost sounded like, "despite everything." Her gaze swept over my dress like a blade. And I felt, again, that pang of shame that she loved to provoke. As we walked, I noticed some people subtly nudging each other. Others simply observed, with expressions that mixed curiosity, judgment, and, in some cases, pity. Pity. That was the worst kind, because pity doesn't come from those who see you. Pity comes from those who have already concluded that you are inferior. And there, in that luxurious hall, I seemed to be the only one carrying the weight of a past they would never accept as legitimate. When I finally approached my son, I tried to smile sincerely. I didn't want to create any bad atmosphere, much less make him feel uncomfortable. But before I could say anything, my daughter-in-law stepped forward and answered for him, as if she were the family spokesperson. She said, "We're busy now, you two can talk later." The word "you" sounded so cold that I almost recoiled. My son just nodded. He didn't touch me, didn't hug me, didn't even give me a shy smile. I stood there for a few seconds, trying to understand if I truly belonged in that celebration. The sound of laughter mixed with the music seemed distant, muffled, as if I were inside an aquarium observing the lives of others through the glass wall. And the more I tried to find a place for myself in there, the more I felt the room shrinking around me, as if I were a foreign body trying to fit into a space that didn't want me. There was a table near the bar, where some younger women were chatting. As I passed them, I clearly heard one of them say, "Is that the birthday boy's mother?" And the other replied in a low voice, but not low enough to hide the irony. I knew it was someone like that by the clothes. The word like that kept hammering inside me. Like what? Simple? Poor? Out of place? I didn't need to ask. The answers were in the air, heavy, almost solid. I walked to a corner of the hall where there was an empty chair. I sat down carefully, adjusting my dress so as not to look awkward. I ran my hand over the stitching of the embroidery, as if touching it would give me some kind of strength. I looked around and tried to take a deep breath, but it was as if the air was too heavy, full of expectations that I couldn't fulfill. The sound of the music vibrated in my chest, mixed with the sound of my own racing heart. And there, in that corner chair, while I watched my son being admired by the entire room and my daughter-in-law circulating like an untouchable queen, I realized that my presence truly bothered them. But not for the reasons she implied. I bothered them because I reminded my son of where he came from. I was living proof that he wasn't born into the luxury he now flaunted. And that was something many there should never know, including her. As I sat in that corner, I noticed how time seemed to pass differently there. The conversations in the hall were quick, lively, full of glitz and superficiality, but in my small space the clock seemed to tick too slowly, as if forcing me to savor every second of that silent solitude. I saw people circulating with full glasses, laughing loudly, taking photos, celebrating, and I was there, motionless, observing everything like someone watching a life I no longer belonged to. It was as if I had been invited to see the party, but not to participate in it. Every few minutes, someone would pass by me, but no one stopped. I was seen but not noticed. Seen, but not recognized. It was as if the world around me had learned to automatically look away whenever I tried to raise my face. This created a strange, almost physical sensation, as if I were transparent. And the more invisible I felt, the more my heart ached with that deep discomfort, that kind of pain that doesn't scream. It just tightens, tightens, and tightens. I looked at my son from a distance, trying to decipher something familiar about him. I searched his face for the boy I raised, the one who called me my best friend, the one who said he would never leave me alone. But the man I saw there had a different look, a different posture, a different manner. He seemed to always be around his wife, orbiting her as if she were the absolute center of his life. And I was a faded, forgotten planet, spinning alone in the darkness. There was a moment when he passed close to me, just a few steps away. My heart even raced, hoping that he would at least put his hand on my shoulder and say, "Are you okay, Mom?" But he didn't see me, or pretended not to see me. He walked so fast that the wind from his movement almost messed up my hair. That's when I understood that, within that party, I was just an annoying detail, background noise. An old portrait on a modern wall. As I watched, I realized my daughter-in-law loved the role she was playing that night. She moved with rehearsed elegance, like a leading actress who knows exactly where to step to shine. She greeted everyone with a perfect smile, but when she passed near me, her smile vanished for a second. It was imperceptible to others, but to me, that detail screamed. I know that look. It's the look of someone who wants to maintain control of everything, including the people she wants to push away. Sometimes someone would come up to her and ask something about my son's family. I'd see her clench her jaw, take a deep breath, and answer with neutral, cut-off sentences, as if she were talking about things she'd rather forget. She wouldn't mention my name. She wouldn't mention my story. I was a footnote, an unwanted footnote she tried to hide in every way. And that, more than anything, made me feel like I'd lost the right to exist in the world my son now called his life. The waiter passed by offering canapés and stopped in front of me. The way he looked at me wasn't with disdain. It was with bewilderment. He seemed unsure if I was a guest or a lost employee. I think that hurt me more than any provocation from my daughter-in-law, because, in that artificially luxurious environment, I truly felt out of place. The food he offered had a sophisticated aroma, but the taste at that moment was too bitter for me to accept. To disguise my loneliness, I picked up my phone and started scrolling aimlessly. Pretending to be busy always helps hide the emptiness. But even that weighed on me. I looked at old photos, simple moments, small parties, but full of truth. My son smiling, hugging me, My house full of life. Our Sunday nights filled with laughter. I quickly closed the gallery because this comparison between past and present tore something inside me that I was trying to keep whole. There was a moment when I felt tears threatening to fall, but I wiped them away before they appeared. My daughter-in-law had forbidden two emotional expressions, remember? So I took a deep breath, lifted my chin, and swallowed the tears as I've done since I was a girl. The truth is, there in that corner, I felt that the party needed that invisible version of me to remain perfect in her eyes. And that gave me a bitter certainty. My presence was only tolerated as long as I was silent, still, discreet, and faded. But, sitting in that cold corner, something began to stir inside. I don't know if it was indignation, weariness, or an ancient force that life had taught me to keep hidden. I only know that the invisibility was ceasing to hurt me and beginning to awaken me. Because there are moments in life when being ignored gradually transforms into the exact fuel to do something that no one expects. And the party was far from over. While I remained in my corner, observing everything from afar, I began to notice a pattern in the way my daughter-in-law behaved. She not only occupied the center of the room, but she made a point of keeping that center exclusively for herself. And the cruelest part was how she did it, illuminating herself at the expense of my shadow. Every gesture, every smile, every conversation, everything seemed rehearsed to reinforce a perfect image of herself as a refined, successful, modern woman. And I was the contrast deliberately chosen to highlight her brilliance. At one point, I saw a group of guests gather near the main table. My daughter-in-law was there, gesturing, laughing loudly, charming, masterfully playing the role of the ideal hostess. When one of the men asked about my son's family, she tilted her head as if preparing the perfect answer and responded with a carefully edited version of our story. She said that my son had to learn a lot on his own, that he came from a humble background, and that she helped him grow socially. When I heard that, I felt a warmth rise up my face. Simple? He came from effort, from struggle, from dignity. And alone? He was never alone. I was there, in every fall, in every difficult night, in every pain he felt. But there, in front of those guests, my daughter-in-law was painting a picture where I barely existed. It was as if she had ripped my presence from his past, as if I were an irrelevant figure who contributed nothing. The worst part was seeing my son beside her, smiling, agreeing, taking it all in as if it were true. At another point, I heard a woman praising my daughter-in-law's good taste and asking where all that sophistication came from. My daughter-in-law laughed, placing her hand on her chest, and said, "Oh, it's because I didn't have the privilege of growing up surrounded by simplicity. So I learned quickly where I want to be." She looked at me at that moment. It wasn't a long look, but it was enough to make it clear that the sentence was for me, and for everyone there to understand who she was talking about. It was as if she were saying, "I've risen. She's been left behind." Later, as I was passing by the bar to get a glass of water, because the air in the room seemed to grow heavier by the minute, I heard someone ask if I was the host's mother. My daughter-in-law answered before I could even open my mouth. Yes, she's very sentimental. Sometimes she gets lost in the past. But we always try to comfort her. We try. We try. That word cut me like a knife. Her tone was that of someone carrying a burden, not a bond. And the worst part is that she said it smiling, as if it were a loving comment. I stepped away to catch my breath. The scent of her perfume lingered in the air, overwhelming my senses, as if marking its territory. The loud music, the flashing lights, the exaggerated laughter, it all made me feel even more lost. I walked between the tables and noticed some guests looking at me with that look that mixes curiosity and judgment, as if trying to understand what I was doing there. And all this was happening while my daughter-in-law shone, radiant, with an energy that seemed to shine even brighter as my pain intensified. She made a point of hugging people in front of me, of praising her in-laws with tears in her eyes, of thanking her family for their support, always hers. Never ours. Never my husband or our family. It was as if she had rewritten my son's last name, erasing any trace of his origins. And seeing my son smiling, enchanted, almost hypnotized by her presence, it was like watching someone throw dirt on my own history. There was a moment when she commented on the party decorations and said something like, "I made sure everything was perfect, mainly because some family members aren't used to events of this scale." People laughed. And I, who was right behind her, felt that laughter as if it had been directed straight to my heart. It wasn't just mockery. It was domination. It was a way of showing everyone that she had power. Power over the environment. Power over the narrative. Power over my son. I sat down again, feeling my vision blur for a few moments. I don't know if from holding back tears or emotional exhaustion. The party continued, lively, colorful, full of life, while I withered a little more with each passing minute. But there, in that cold chair, something began to change. Because, while it shone at my expense, I remembered every sacrifice I made. Every sleepless night I spent. Every piece of clothing I mended. Every silent battle I fought alone. And I realized it was building a lie. And I carried the truth. And when a lie grows too big, it only takes a spark of truth to bring it down completely. The party was in full swing when it happened. The music was louder, the lights brighter, the smiles wider. People seem to have reached that point in the night where everything becomes excessive. Laughter that echoes too loudly, hugs that last too short a time, and conversations that overlap until no one can hear anyone else anymore. I was there, in the same corner where I'd hidden all night, trying to be small, discreet, almost non-existent, exactly as my daughter-in-law wanted. But fate sometimes chooses specific moments to reveal hidden truths. That's when they announced the toast. Everyone gathered around the main table, raising glasses, expecting some beautiful speech, the kind that moves even those who have no connection whatsoever with the host. My son climbed onto a small platform, adjusted the microphone, and smiled at the audience. I felt my heart swell for a moment. Even though he was far away, he was my son. I had seen him grow, learn, fall, and get back up. I stood up from my chair, taking a few steps to get closer. As I was walking, I heard my daughter-in-law whisper to a friend, "Hopefully she won't make a scene now. If anything, I'll get her out of here." My friend laughed loudly, so loudly that some people turned around. My face burned instantly. It was no longer just an insinuation. It wasn't a veiled comment. It was public humiliation, explicit, cruel, said with a nonchalance that only someone who truly despises can demonstrate. My son began his speech by thanking everyone, his friends, his work colleagues, his in-laws, especially his in-laws, and his wife, whom he praised as the light that transformed his life. I watched everything with a heavy heart, hoping, perhaps naively, that he would at least mention his mother. A sentence, a word, a gesture, but nothing. He thanked everyone except me. And the worst part is that people understood. Some even looked at me with pity, the kind of pity that tears deeper than contempt. When the speech ended, my daughter-in-law took the microphone. She loved being the center of attention, and this was the perfect moment for her to shine. She began by praising her husband, talking about how they had overcome challenges alone, how they had built everything through their own effort, and about the new life they were building together. Each word was like a stab, as if she were tearing my presence from his life story in front of everyone. That's when she looked directly at me, and I swear I saw a glint of provocation in her eyes, and said, in her sweet, venomous voice, "And I also thank everyone who came, even those who don't quite understand how events like this work, but who made an effort not to cause embarrassment." The pause before causing embarrassment was surgically precise. Her gaze was fixed on me. The people around noticed. Silence. Then, discreet giggles. I felt my whole body freeze. My son placed his hand on her arm, as if trying to control her outburst, but it was too late. The arrow had already been launched. She continued, "It's so nice when everyone collaborates to make everything look elegant, isn't it?" Elegant. The word landed like a stone on the floor. The message was clear. I was the inelegant element of the party. I was the risk. I was the shame. In front of everyone. I felt my legs tremble. For a moment, I thought I would fall right there, in front of all those people who had never known me, but who had already been invited to judge me. The air grew heavy. The room spun slightly. The dress, my simple dress, seemed to shrink on my body as if it had become living proof of everything she was insinuating. I wanted to disappear, evaporate. But the worst was yet to come. An older lady, perhaps a friend of my daughter-in-law's family, looked at me and said aloud, loud enough for me to hear, low enough to pretend it wasn't about me, "Some people really don't know their place." My chest tightened so much that I felt physical pain. My son heard it. I saw him hear it. And even so, he said nothing. His silence was like a sentence. That's when I understood that, in his eyes, I truly no longer had a place in that world. And yet, within that pain, something stirred inside me. A different kind of tremor, a force that came from the depths of my soul, something I hadn't felt in many years. The humiliation didn't destroy me. It awakened me. And at that very moment, even with the muffled laughter still in the background and the entire room vibrating with false energy, I realized that the party wouldn't end like that. Not for me, not for him, and certainly not for her. The night was far from over, and inside me, a silent decision was beginning to take shape. After that humiliation, I didn't hear anything else from the party. The music kept playing, people kept laughing, the flashes from the photos still illuminated the walls. But for me, everything felt like it was underwater, muffled, distant, unrecognizable. My mind kept repeating that cruel phrase, that look from my daughter-in-law, that little laugh from the people around me. I felt smaller than ever, as if the whole world had been reduced to a tiny point in the corner of that cold room. But for some reason, this inner silence didn't break me. It rearranged me. I sat down again in the same chair where I'd spent much of the night, but now with a different feeling. It wasn't shame. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't even anger, despite everything. It was a heavy, profound silence, filled with something I hadn't felt in a long time. Clarity. A harsh, cutting, almost painful clarity, but one that came with a force I didn't know still existed within me. It was as if my heart, after taking so much beating, had decided to stop shrinking. As I watched my daughter-in-law circling the room, laughing as if nothing had happened, and my son chatting, oblivious to the damage being done to me, I realized something terrible and liberating. I had spent years trying to be accepted, years trying to fit in, to diminish my mannerisms, to bite my tongue, to wear what wasn't mine, to swallow silent humiliations, all to maintain peace. But at that exact moment, I realized that the peace I was trying to preserve never existed. I was preserving an illusion. That realization hit me like a bolt of lightning. And, for the first time that night, I straightened up in my chair. Not to appear strong to others. I had nothing left to prove to anyone there, but to myself. I felt my spine adjust, my shoulders relax, and my chest take a deep breath, as if finally remembering that there was still life pulsing inside. That invisible version of me no longer existed. Something inside me had awakened, something ancient, something that had been sleeping, something I had spent years suppressing. I spent a few minutes observing the room with different eyes, observing her every gesture, his every word, every fake smile he gave the guests. It was like watching a play where all the actors were pretending to play roles that didn't truly belong to them. And I, sitting there in the dark, realized that perhaps, for the first time, I was seeing everything correctly, without illusions, without excuses, without fantasies that one day we would be a harmonious family. The truth was laid bare. And the truth sets you free. I took a deep breath and felt a wave of memories wash over me. I remembered the nights I sold lunch to pay for dinner. The early mornings I woke up to check if my son had a fever. The times I faced the whole world to protect him. The silent sacrifices that no one there imagined. My love was the building block of every step he took in life. And yet, there I was, being treated like a burden. The injustice of it didn't destroy me. It strengthened me. That's when I thought about the secret I'd carried for decades. The weight I'd borne alone. The truth I'd kept hidden so he could have a new, clean, respectable life. My daughter-in-law, with all her arrogance and venom, had no idea what I'd done for that man she called her perfect husband. And for the first time, I realized that maybe it was time to stop carrying everything alone. Maybe it was time to break the silence. The hall, which had previously seemed like a prison, now resembled a stage. And for the first time, I felt I had something to say, something big, something important, something that could no longer be kept inside. The public humiliation had been the spark, but the flame came from all the years of unrequited love. The flame came from the truth that throbbed within me, begging to be set free. And I knew that when I spoke, no one there would forget. I rose slowly from my chair, feeling my legs steady. The sound of my footsteps seemed to echo louder than it should, or perhaps it was just my own heightened awareness, sharpened, heightened. Each step I took toward the center of the room seemed to push a piece of my old self back. I was no longer an invisible figure. I was ready to be seen not because I wanted to, but because it was necessary. And at that moment, as I walked toward the microphone that was still plugged in on the stage, my heart pounded with a courage I hadn't felt since I was young. It was as if the silence, that painful silence that was meant to shame me, had transformed into the fuel I needed to finally speak, to finally act, to finally show that the truth always finds a way to emerge. And when I put my hand on the edge of the stage, ready to go up, I knew that party would never be the same after what I was about to do. I sat for a moment at the foot of the stage, breathing deeply, trying to control the trembling in my hands. It wasn't fear, it was something bigger, deeper, as if all the versions of myself that had been silenced over the years were rising up at once inside my chest. I could hear the music, but it seemed distant, distorted, as if it came from a different world. The hall continued its festive atmosphere. No one imagined that I was about to change the course of that night, and, perhaps, of our entire story. The microphone was still on its stand, abandoned after my daughter-in-law's toast. It seemed to call to me, as if to say, "Now it's your turn." My legs were steady, even though my heart was racing. I touched the wooden stage, feeling its cold, smooth texture beneath my fingers. It was like touching an ancient truth, kept hidden for too long. And, for the first time that night, I felt I wasn't fighting alone. There was something, perhaps strength, perhaps honor, perhaps the past itself, walking with me. I carefully climbed a small step, trying not to attract attention prematurely. But people noticed different movements at parties. Some heads turned. The sound of conversations faded slightly, as if a wave of curiosity was beginning to form. I held the microphone with both hands and felt a shiver run up my arms. I had been brought to my knees so many times by the weight of life, but at that moment, I was the only one standing with truth in my heart. My daughter-in-law was the first to react. Her eyes widened. She took 2 quick steps toward me and, with that fake smile that hides poison, said softly, "What are you doing?"
"Get out of there."
Her voice trembled, not with worry, but with fear. Fear of losing control. Fear of me shattering the perfect image she had constructed for the guests. And it was there, in that desperate look of hers, that I was absolutely certain I needed to continue. I took a deep breath, adjusted the microphone, and said, my voice steady, though choked with emotion, "I'd like to say a few words." That simple phrase fell like a stone in the room. The murmuring ceased. Some people exchanged curious glances. Others frowned. And my son stood there like a statue. Arms crossed, expression tense, like someone who sees something inevitable approaching and knows there's no way to stop it. My daughter-in-law tried to interrupt, placing her hand on my arm and saying, "I think it's better if we leave this for another day, don't you think, dear?" The dear sounded like a veiled threat. But I, with all the serenity that a lifetime of scars had taught me, gently removed her hand and said, "Not today. Today I will speak." She took a step back, lost, unsure what to answer. And in that silent gesture, I felt that I was finally reclaiming something they had tried to steal from me, my voice. I looked around, meeting the faces that had previously ignored me. Some seemed uncomfortable, as if afraid to witness something too intimate. Others were attentive, curious, as if sensing a revelation. I could hear my own breath echoing through the speakers. For the first time at that party, the entire room was looking at me, not at my daughter-in-law, not at my son, but at me. And that feeling was so strong it almost made me cry. But I held on. I needed to hold on. Because I wasn't there to collapse. I was there to uncover the truth that had been hidden in the shadows for so long. I adjusted the microphone once more and felt my fingers stop trembling. It was as if my soul had finally found its rightful place. My heart no longer beat with fear, but with justice. And deep inside, I knew everything that came after that moment could no longer be erased. The silence that followed was so profound that I could hear the ice clinking in glasses, the whisper of nervous breaths, even the distant sound of forks being placed on plates. It was the perfect silence, the kind of silence that precedes something great. And for a moment, I felt the presence of my mother, of my past, of my choices, of all the versions of myself that had survived until then. It was as if they were all saying to me, "Now. It's now." And with the entire room frozen in front of me, I asked the question that would change everything. Do you know who really saved my son's life? The impact of the sentence echoed through the room like a silent lightning bolt. And there, in that second, I saw clearly. No one was breathing. Not even her. When I asked that question, do you know who really saved my son's life? The entire room seemed to freeze. It was as if someone had pressed an invisible button and paralyzed everything around them. The music faded, the laughter ceased, and even the lights seemed to flicker more slowly. I felt all eyes on me, some curious, others frightened, many incredulous. My own breath echoed through the microphone, and my fingers, previously trembling, were steady as if they finally knew it was time to carry the world. My son took a step forward, disconcerted. It was as if he recognized that phrase, not by what I said, but by what it announced. The past he had tried to hide, forget, bury was about to be unearthed before all his friends, colleagues, bosses, his arrogant wife, and her family. He was pale, motionless, his gaze fixed on me. That look said it all without words. Please, Mom, no. But it was too late. He never asked me to protect him. And now, I wasn't going to protect him from what he himself had built. I took a deep breath and let the truth rise from my throat like an ancient lament. There was one night, a night when my son made a grave mistake. A mistake that could have ended his future, his youth, his freedom. People murmured in surprise. I saw shocked faces, glasses being lowered, hands going to mouths. My daughter-in-law, however, she was motionless. Her expression was hard, but her eyes wide. As if, for the first time in her life, control was slipping through her fingers. I continued, my voice firm. That night, I received a call that no mother should ever receive. I went to the place, found my son in a panic, trembling, sweating, thinking his life was over. He looked at me like a frightened child and asked me for help. And I helped. My voice trembled at that part. Not because of the secret, but because of the weight of the memories. The room was in absolute silence. Even the air seemed still, suspended. My daughter-in-law stepped forward, trying to interrupt. That's not appropriate. I think it's better. I raised my hand and cut her, without taking my eyes off her. You silenced my voice many times, my daughter. Not today. The impact was so strong that some people choked on their drinks. My daughter-in-law recoiled, unsure how to respond, without the social mask she always wore. For the first time, she seemed human. Scared. Disarmed. I looked back at the room. I took the blame. I signed the documents. I put myself in his place so that he wouldn't destroy his own life. I sold the few things I had to pay lawyers. I bribed those who needed to be calmed down. I faced authorities alone, all so that my son would come out clean. So that he would have a second chance. A woman in the back put her hand to her chest. A man murmured, "My God." That was it. The room was absorbing, devouring every word. And he never told anyone. I continued. Not even his wife. Not even her family, who loved to talk about values, elegance, and good manners. I looked directly at my daughter-in-law. You think you made him a better man. But the truth is, without me, he wouldn't have even made it to marriage. I carried the worst part of his life on my shoulders, and nobody here knew it. My son was motionless. His hands were trembling. His face was red with shame. His eyes were filled with tears that he tried to hide. I brought the microphone close to my lips, giving each word space to cut through the air. I was the one who saved your future. I was the one who paid the price for your mistakes. I was the one who gave you the life you now display as a trophy in this hall. My son shook his head, unable to speak. My daughter-in-law was pale, breathing rapidly, disoriented. It was as if the perfect world she had built had just cracked right in the middle. And then, in the calmest voice I've ever heard, I concluded, all of this, I did in silence. But today, after everything I've experienced here, after everything I've heard, after everything I've endured, I no longer carry the secret alone. The truth belongs to all of us now. The entire room seemed to have stopped in time. I was on stage, not as the invisible mother-in-law they'd ignored all night, but as the only person at that party with the courage to say what no one else dared to hear. And I knew that what came next would change everything. After I finished speaking, the silence that filled the room wasn't just an absence of sound. It was a living, pulsating, almost physical silence. I could feel it sliding across my skin, entering my ears, tightening my chest. It was as if each person there was trying to digest the truth I had just poured onto that floor, too bright for such human stories. No one moved. No one breathed deeply. It was the kind of silence that precedes earthquakes or destruction. My son stood a few steps away from me. I watched him with a clarity only a mother possesses. First came the shock, his eyes wide, his mouth slightly open, his body rigid as if he'd been punched in the stomach. Then the shame. It crept slowly, like an open wound. It started at his neck, climbed to his ears, and stained his entire face red. He blinked rapidly, as if trying to wake from a nightmare. But there was no way to wake him. This wasn't a dream. It was the truth. His truth. The truth I carried alone. When he finally tried to speak, no words came out. He opened his mouth, swallowed hard, tried again, but nothing. It was as if the words were stuck in his throat, suffocated by years of denial, ingratitude, and convenient silence. The microphone was near him, but his hand trembled so much that he didn't even dare touch it. I've never seen my son so small, and I never imagined that seeing this smallness would bring so much weight to my heart. My daughter-in-law, on the other hand, looked like a cracked statue. Her eyes wide with terror, her jaw clenched, her breathing short and disordered. She desperately searched for words, but couldn't find them. Everything she had built, the speech, the image, the pose, the control, crumbled before the guests. And no matter how hard I tried to find a little compassion within myself, the only thing I found was peace. The bitter peace of someone who has finally stopped being trampled on. The guests began exchanging uncomfortable glances. Some whispered. Others looked down at the floor, as if witnessing something too intimate to be there. It was the first time all night that I wasn't invisible. It was the first time my presence had weight, impact, consequence. And realizing that, after years of being silenced, sent a warm shiver down my spine. I hadn't expected to feel strength in such a fragile moment, but I did. My son ran his hand over his face, trying to regain control. When he finally found his voice, it came out low, trembling, almost unrecognizable. Mom, why did you do that now? I almost laughed, not in mockery, but out of deep sadness. It wasn't why did I say that? It was why now? He wanted to preserve appearances. Even in pain, he still tried to protect his own pride. And that hurt more than any words from my daughter-in-law, because it showed that he still didn't understand that that revelation wasn't revenge. It was a suffocated truth gasping for air. Before I could answer, my daughter-in-law took a step forward, trying to regain her composure. That doesn't change anything, she said, her voice unsteady. You shouldn't expose this kind of thing. It was irresponsible. The word hurt me, But it also set me free. Because, for the first time, my response came instantly, without hesitation, without fear. It was irresponsible of you to pretend you built this man all by yourself. She stepped back. Two people behind her gasped. And my son lowered his head, as if finally seeing something he had avoided for years. His silence said it all. He knew I was right, that I knew I had been the shield, that I knew I had been the ground, that I knew I had been the bridge, and I knew, above all, that I had allowed that woman to diminish me in the eyes of the whole world. I looked at him, and in that gaze there was no hatred. There was an old, deep, accumulated pain, but there was also something new, firmness. I didn't want to destroy him. I didn't want to expose his life. But I needed to reclaim mine. And in that instant, faced with his absolute silence, I realized that perhaps this was the first time in many years that he was being forced to confront his own story without filters. Finally, he slowly raised his eyes, and when our gazes met, something inside him broke. I didn't hear a snap, I didn't hear a word, but I saw it. I saw the boy he was. I saw the man he had become. I saw the guilt. I saw the regret. I saw the shame. I saw everything. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that nothing would ever be the same again. But the most important thing was yet to come, because at that moment, I knew exactly what I still needed to do. After my son finally lifted his face and let the shame stream down his face, I felt the time had come for the final blow, not to hurt him, but to free myself. My hand was steady, even with my heart pounding in my chest. I already knew what I needed to do. The truth spoken in words had already struck that room like lightning, but the material truth, the one no one can deny, was still with me, kept in my simple bag, hidden for as many years as the secret I carried. Calmly, I descended from the small platform. Each step seemed to carry symbolic weight, as if I were crossing a portal between the past that had imprisoned me and the future I was finally reclaiming. People moved aside to make way, some shocked, others mesmerized, others almost afraid of what was to come. The music didn't return. No one dared to speak. The hall was so silent that I could hear the sound of my own footsteps hitting the gleaming floor. When I stood before my son, he seemed smaller than ever. Shoulders slumped, eyes downcast, hands trembling. My daughter-in-law, beside him, was breathing rapidly, as if on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Her face was tense, her eyes brimming with tears, not from emotion, but from pure fury mixed with despair. She knew I wasn't finished yet, and she also knew that the next blow would be one she could never erase, deny, or manipulate. I slowly opened the bag, feeling the sound of the zipper echo in my soul. It was like opening a safe, like releasing decades of pain, sacrifice, and silence. My fingers found the brown envelope, the one I'd kept at the bottom of the drawer for so many years, always afraid that one day I'd need to use it. The paper was worn at the edges, a little crumpled, but still firm. Proof that the past doesn't disappear just because someone wants to pretend it never existed. I held up the envelope with a trembling hand, driven only by emotion, not fear. And I said, in a low voice, but firm enough to echo throughout the entire room, "Here it is. Everything you never knew. Everything I hid to protect his future." Some people stepped forward, as if pulled by an invisible thread. The weight of truth had its own attraction. My daughter-in-law recoiled, bringing her hand to her mouth. Her face lost all color. It was as if she had seen a ghost, and, in a way, she had. The ghost of the truth she had tried to bury. I looked into my son's eyes as I held the envelope. "You know what's in here," I murmured. He swallowed hard. And the answer came in silence, a silence heavy with guilt, with memories, with nights we both tried to erase. He knew. He remembered. And that memory, buried under years of comfort and convenience, now screamed inside him. I saw his eyes fill with tears, but he couldn't look away. It was as if the envelope were a mirror, reflecting everything he had tried to hide, even from himself. Then, with a slow, solemn, almost ritualistic gesture, I handed him the envelope. The instant he touched the paper with his fingers, I felt, physically, The weight I had carried for decades lifted from my hands. It's strange how a simple object can hold so much pain. But that envelope was more than just paper. It was my sacrificed youth. It was my possessions sold. It was my sleepless nights. It was my hidden tears. It was proof of the price a mother pays for love. My son held the envelope like someone holding a bomb about to explode. His hand trembled so much that the paper rattled in the air. He tried to open his mouth, perhaps to apologize, perhaps to deny it, perhaps to beg, but nothing came out. His voice was stuck in his throat, buried by shame. I watched him with a mixture of pain and freedom, because in that instant I wasn't seeking revenge. I was freeing myself. I looked around the room, at all those faces that now didn't know where to hide their own expressions. They had seen the staged version of my son's life. Now they were seeing the raw, naked, human truth. And there, before them, I said the phrase that has aged with me. You all know the man he's become, but only I know the price he cost. And as he held the envelope against his chest, I could feel, with my whole soul, that the next step would decide everything. Everything, really. Because now, all that was missing was the final gesture. When my son held the envelope to his chest, as if trying to prevent the whole world from seeing what he had hidden for so many years, I felt a strange peace within me. Not a sweet peace, but that hard peace that is born after a war that has been too long. The room remained silent. You could even hear the distant sound of the air conditioner. The guests were paralyzed. My imaginary grandchildren, if they existed, would be silent. And my daughter-in-law seemed about to collapse. But at that moment, it wasn't about her anymore. It was about him. It was about the two of us. My son finally looked up and tried to say my name. Mom. The word came out broken, weak, almost a cry for help. His eyes were full of tears, and I recognized the lost boy I had so often held in my arms. But now it was different. I was no longer the mother who carried everything on her shoulders. I was no longer the silent pillar who suffered in silence to protect. I was the woman who finally demanded respect. And he realized this the moment his eyes met mine. The entire room seemed to hold its breath when he took a step toward me. I saw his desperate attempt to say something, perhaps to apologize, perhaps to justify himself, perhaps to shrink back. But I raised my hand before he could say anything. Not aggressively, but with the firmness of someone who had spent their whole life waiting for this moment. My hand suspended in the air created an invisible wall between us, a wall not of rejection, but of boundary. Something he never expected me to be capable of erecting. I breathed in slowly, and, in that absolute silence, I did something that no one expected, least of all him. I leaned forward, lightly pressed the envelope against his chest, and said, in the calmest, hardest voice I'd ever heard, "Now, this burden is no longer mine." It was a simple phrase, but loaded with all the meaning in the world. I saw his expression melt. I saw guilt trickle down his face like cold sweat. I saw reality hit him with the force of a hurricane. It was like watching, in real time, the fall of the castle of vanity he built on the back of my silence. My daughter-in-law, unable to control herself, stepped forward and tried to grab the envelope from his hand, as if she could snatch the truth from him and destroy it before it could tarnish her. But I was quicker. I gently held her wrist, not forcefully but authoritatively, and said, "This matter is not yours." The sentence fell to the floor like a dead weight. She stood motionless. The room murmured. And my son finally seemed to realize that nothing was under her control anymore. For the first time since I met her, she was in the place she had tried to push me into my whole life, the place of silence. After that, I took a step back. And then came the final gesture, the one that would leave my son speechless, with all the serenity in the world, without anger, without shouting, without despair. I placed my hand on my heart and said, "I'm not leaving hurt. I'm leaving in peace. Because today, I chose myself." The phrase echoed throughout the entire hall. And in that instant, something almost cinematic happened. Everyone stepped back, making way. as if recognizing that someone was passing by who had finally regained their dignity. My son desperately tried to reach out his hand to stop me. "Mom, please wait." But his voice failed him. He couldn't finish the sentence. He was speechless. I watched him open and close his mouth, searching for explanations, excuses, justifications, but nothing came. It was as if his entire vocabulary had evaporated before the force of what I had said. He seemed like a man emotionally naked, exposed, without shields. I just gave him one last look, not of anger, not of resentment, but of liberation. A look that said, without needing to speak, "Now it's up to you." And that look hurt him more than any speech could. Because the truth doesn't need shouting. The truth, when spoken by someone who has spent their life being silenced, has the power to crumble entire fortifications. And then, without drama, without haste, without hesitation, I turned my back to him and walked to the door of the hall. Each step felt like a new chapter being written. I felt my shoulders getting lighter, my back straighter, my chest freer. And when I finally touched the doorknob, I heard the first sound my son managed to make after all that pain, a broken sob. Just that, a sob. And at that moment, I was absolutely certain, for the first time in my life, I left him speechless. On the way home, as the cold wind whipped against my face and the silence of the early morning embraced my tired body, I realized that, in the end, life is made of choices. And that night, after decades of swallowing pain to preserve the image of a family that never truly embraced me, I finally chose myself. It's strange. When you stop expecting recognition from others, the weight of their words ceases to hurt you. And for the first time in many years, I felt that dignity had returned to live within me. And you know what's most curious? It wasn't the scandal, nor the envelope, nor their shame that gave me peace. It was the silence. My silence. That silence that wasn't born of fear, but of liberation. That silence that says, I don't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. And I keep thinking about how many people spend their whole lives trying to fit into the spaces that others offer, when, in fact, they should build their own spaces, even if that means walking out the door with an entire party staring. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that we should never let anyone, not even those we love, diminish who we are. Because when we do that, we slowly disappear from ourselves. And we only realize it when it's too late. I took too long. I took years. But you who are listening to me now, you don't need to wait that long. Don't wait for someone to choose you to finally feel worthy. Choose yourself first. Always. Now I ask you, have you ever been in a situation where you needed to reclaim your own voice? Have you ever had to stand up to someone who tried to belittle you? Or are you still learning to set boundaries where before you only lowered your head? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear from you. And if the story moved you, don't forget. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications because there are so many powerful stories like that I still want to share with you.